Hi, this is Andrew Walker, Solutions Architect with Arcee AI. Today, I'm excited to introduce Arcee Conductor, an innovative inference platform designed to optimize the use of language models by automatically routing prompts to the most appropriate and cost-effective model available. In today's AI landscape, companies need to choose between small language models, which are trained to be performant and cost-efficient, with large language models, which are built to handle the most complex tasks. This often leads to companies choosing a model which can handle the majority of their use cases, but not all, or drastically overpaying for a large language model for all their tasks when it isn't needed. Arcee Conductor solves this problem by automatically routing prompts to both small language models and large language models based on characteristics of the prompt. To get started, go to models.arcee.ai. Now let's jump in and see what Arcee Conductor looks like. There are two primary ways which you can interact with Arcee Conductor. Directly via an API, which we'll showcase later, as well as in the user interface. The UI provides two primary components. First is the chat interface, where you can directly chat back and forth with Conductor, as well as a compare feature, which allows you to compare Conductor directly against another model in order to see how it performs. First, we'll quickly take a look at the chat interface. Here, we can see in the top left that auto is selected. This is how we know that the routing feature of Conductor is selected. We can ask it a prompt, such as writing a short welcome message for Conductor. This is a very simple task, so we can see here it very quickly responds and utilized Arcee Blitz. Blitz is a 24 billion parameter small language model from Arcee, so it is extremely cheap and performant. In addition to the response, we can see information about why this model was selected and information such as the input-output tokens for the response, as well as the response time and the cost for the specific query. Reasoning for why this model was chosen is provided so that you have insight into why this specific model was chosen over another. Let's take a look at how this would work for a much more complicated task. Here we'll ask it to explain the difference between logic-based distillation and hidden state distillation and show an example of both in Python code. Now this is more complex because you're doing both text generation for more complex tasks as well as code generation for two separate topics. In this example, contrary to our previous request, we want to route to a more complex model that can sufficiently answer this query. So in the previous example where we wanted to go to a really fast and cheap model, here we're expecting to go to a larger model, which we can see is exactly what happened. This was routed to Sonnet 3.7. It explains that the reason for routing to the larger model is due to the complexity of the task, and shows us that the task type was code generation, the domain was computers and electronics, and this specific request had a complexity of 5. Now, the big thing to highlight here is take a look at the cost comparison. This is the direct cost that it would cost you to directly invoke the Claude model, and you can see it's 2 cents for this specific query. If we had utilized Sonnet 3.7 for all our queries, including the previous one, this higher cost would add up over time, even when it's not necessary to use this large of a model for that specific task. And this is really where Conductor highlights the value. Now let's take a comparison of how we can compare Conductor directly against another model. Here we can see on the left side we have auto selected, so that will do the routing. And then on the right side we can select the model that we'd want to compare it against. You can choose between a variety of Arcee small language models, as well as third-party models such as Claude, DeepSeek, or OpenAI models. Let's select Claude 3.7. And we'll ask it a couple other questions. First, let's ask it to explain the pros and cons of CPU inference and GPU inference for small language models. Again, this is a relatively simple task, but on a slightly more complicated topic than the very first prompt we sent. We can see that on the left side, this was sent to Virtuoso Medium, and it was able to complete at a fraction of the cost. There was a slightly longer response time, but we can see there also were more output tokens. So on a per token basis, this still executed more quickly. And if we compare the outputs, where we take a look at which each one created, we see that they're relatively similar, right? And this is because this type of task is going to be performed well by both these models. That's why it was selected by Conductor. So while there might be a little bit better formatting on the Claude side of things, the comparison here is to say, is the response from Virtuoso Medium here sufficient enough for the task? Which, in this case, I would say it is. Now, let's ask it another question. This one will ask it to explain string theory at 3 different levels, to a middle schooler, to a college student, and a field expert. Here, we see they both are generating, and on the Conductor side, this routed to Gemini 2.0. So we see that this one was a complexity of 5 as well. If you recall back, the code generation task that we showed before was also a complexity of 5. But because of the task type and the domain, this one routed to Gemini 2.0. And again, it's highlighted that this responds more quickly and has a reduced cost for the specific query. So how can you utilize Conductor within your applications? And that is typically going to be done via the API. To get started with the API, you can go over to API keys and simply create your API key. All you need to do is provide a label, and you'll be able to generate that key. And then if you come over to the prompt library, in the top right, you can see API details. This will provide you information on how you can directly invoke Conductor via an API with streaming disabled or enabled, and then also how you can do it with code. And here you can see this utilizes the OpenAI compatible endpoint. So you are able to set the base URL, specify the Arcee token, and then you're able to utilize Conductor within your code very easily just by switching the model name to auto if you're already utilizing the OpenAI schema. Lastly, you also have the ability to see usage of the different models that you utilize in Conductor. This screen here displays which models prompts have been routed to, how many times those models have been invoked, what the cost is, and the input-output tokens that have been processed through that model. Conductor provides an easy way for you to maximize the value of different language models for different prompts that you provide. In the documentation, there'll be more examples of how you can utilize Conductor.